Good afternoon and happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Just want to say happy Turkey Day, even if you're not celebrating. I hope that you find something to be thankful for and enjoy time with your family or your friends. And make sure you tell someone that you love them today. You never know when it can be their last moment on this earth. So I want to start off with that. Before we get into the movie, I want to make a format change to the way I'm going to be reviewing these films. At first, I thought I can do like an essay style video, like without yapping too much, but I'm not gonna lie, like that's really hard to do. So from now on, like I'd much rather go through a quick synopsis of the story. That way everyone is kind of caught up and the stage is set. And then I'll touch on key points and my own opinions of the film and try to avoid the trap of like just summarizing things that happen. I really like the way that my last video turned out, and I like the way I showed the scenes and stuff as I talked about it. But I did run into copyright issues, obviously, and also it's just a lot to edit. So even though it feels like I did a deep dive in that and the rest is going to be kind of lukewarm, I will still just try to do my best to talk about all my opinions. And if you guys feel like there's anything that I've missed, um, when it comes to like my opinions on scenes and stuff like that, feel free to just, if you know me personally, you can shoot me a text or call me if you want. I don't care. Or just leave a comment below and like, hey, you didn't mention this. How do you feel about this? And I'll probably have something to say. It's just kind of hard for me to touch on every little thing because as I'm actively watching these movies, I'm thinking about a lot of stuff, and it's kind of hard to kind of format that in less than like 20 minutes. So, but I will try my best to try to make this more short form. And as a result, these videos are going to be a little bit more like audio friendly. Feel free to just watch me talk. I'm gonna put up like scenes and imagery whenever I'm describing stuff, like set pieces and stuff like that. But for the most part, this is just gonna be me and you, just kind of me yapping and then you listening about me talk about the film. So I highly recommend that you actually watch the film because these reviews aren't really like me telling you whether or not you should go see them. This is more so just, hey, I like something, you should watch it, Cam. Okay, I'll tell you how I feel about it. That way, we both kind of have like that shared imagery of what's going on as I'm talking about the film. But, anyways, let's stop talking about that. Let's actually talk about the film Poor Things, 2023, by a very famous director who's has received nothing but praises. He needs no introduction. So a quick background: I was actually just like recommended Lanthimos. I'm gonna say Lanthimos. I was recommended his films in general, and I decided to go with Poor Things of all of the films because I feel like this was the one that I would probably have the most critiques about the most. I'm aware of the graphic sex thanks to Twitter telling me all the time. And by the synopsis that I read on Wikipedia, it was evident that this would be a film about a woman that's navigating life in ways that I would never know as a modern man. So I always like to approach films that are like a direct opposite or just like so well removed from me. I know this comes with the risk of a film not landing, but I also like to see things from different perspectives. And I know this kind of conflicts with what I said in my first video where I was like how I approach film, where I said that the films that I like the most are the ones that relate to me. But I also like adventuring in uncharted territories. If it's done well, then it's done well, right? It doesn't always have to relate to me to be fun to watch. So now that the stage is set personally and that you know everything that all my mindset going into this film, let's actually talk about the film. So Poor Things is a story about a pregnant woman in the 19th century of London who committed suicide but was then revived by a mad scientist named Godwin, and the woman was renamed Bella. He then appoints his assistant Max to study her as she develops a mind because what the mad scientist essentially did was he took the brain of the infant baby and replaced it into the mind of the adult woman. So she's basically like child inside, adult outside. After studying for a while, Godwin comes to the conclusion that Max should marry Bella because he sees that they are falling in love. However, Bella discovers masturbation and physical pleasure, which leads her to eventually run off with a man named Duncan, who takes advantage of her naivety and takes her off to Portugal. And through Portugal, she learns a lot about society. So that is basically the premise of the film. So I'll rip the band-aid off by saying that I really enjoyed this film. It was a very fun watch with so much deconstruction of society, sex, relationships, and it does a really good job of touching on things that we experience every day in society. And I think about through the lens of a grown woman a lot of the time when I'm watching this film. But it's actually really interesting because it's not just through the lens of a grown woman, but it's through the lens of a grown woman with a child's brain. And it's just done so well. I have notes written down and I'll go through each part. But we can start off with like sort of the beginning, like where I left off when I was summarizing. So the film, you should know that it starts off like an old sci-fi, like it's entirely black and white, and we're introduced to the evil scientist, or I wouldn't say evil, but mad scientist Godwin, who's morally questionable, but he has a well-meaning purpose, and he's a well-meaning person. He's just very curious about biology and people and psychology as well. He's played by the famous William Dafoe, who does an amazing job as always, and the makeup design is amazing. Like he has like these scars on his face. He looks kind of disgusting. He looks scary, but it's also like kind of comforting, like a scarred wise man. There's a lot of nice shots of the city from time to time that kind of sort of puts you in the same place as Bella, as someone who kind of like wants to wonder what's out there, right? Like she's like this sheltered woman, but you're also this none the wiser viewer who's in this like fantasy steampunk world. You as the viewer, much like Bella, might want to see what's out there, and they do this really well by showing like shots of the city. So it's really nice the way that they kind of set the piece together. And this entire time, by the way, it's still black and white, right? um it's not essentially clear what time period we're in, but I like to just settle down on like some kind of like fantasy steampunk 19th century. It's obviously in London. Um, but regardless, there's great visuals throughout the movie. There's also a lot of shots where they kind of like use a fisheye lens effect that you kind of see in like skate videos, and there's also some kind of like peep and hole POV shots too. I don't quite understand the motive behind doing this. I think this was just fun camera work, so I'm not gonna think too hard about it. But if there's any reason for that type of film style, you guys let me know. There's also like a lot of fun old school style dramatic zooms here and there. It's filmed very in a very fun way. They don't really take it too seriously. Throughout the first act of the film, I love the dynamic between Max, Godwin, and Bella. The humor in the movie is amazing, and it goes beyond just character interactions, but also through the naive thoughts of Bella, who like you have to remember this is a child in a woman's body, so she constantly says things aloud in the same way that a child would have no remorse when judging people or situations. Um, we also get a little backstory as to why Godwin did what he did. And this was something that I was curious about in the beginning. It's just like, what's this guy's motive? Um, but there's like this, it really just comes from him kind of coming from a very dark background where his father would kind of abuse him as well. So he that kind of translated into his mind. But in any case, it's all in the sake of science, right? Like this kind of it's very akin to what they used to do back in those times, right? Like medicine back then was very brutal. And there was a lot of experiments done, things that are morally questionable. There was a lot of restrictions that ended up getting placed as we learned more and more about human anatomy. But there are also a lot of scientific discoveries that were found in the name of doing questionable things. So it kind of plays off on that kind of like sense of just like questionable experiments that have good consequences. That's basically kind of like what they show here. And there's also like a really nice, I really love the Frankenstein scene, like showing Bella come to life when they're kind of giving us this backstory. At the time I was thinking though, I was like, man, this dude is kind of like sick in the head. But I also try not to think of this from the lens of a modern person who like, has the advantage of all these research papers and ethics and all that stuff like that. Like this is just what was kind of normal at the time. And even people at the time kind of wouldn't agree with that. Even Max himself is like, bro, you're sick in the head. But in any case, Bella is alive. She's a human being. She deserves a life. Like, what are you gonna do? You gonna punish the man? So what's done is done, right? Eventually, Max and Bella do get engaged. at the request of Godwin. But this is very consensual. These two kind of do love each other, so they decide to get engaged anyway. Um, but this is also when Bella starts to discover sexual pleasure. And this is kind of like when the conflict of the movie settles in, right? Because you have Bella, who was very sheltered, sort of like a woman child, and she's very curious about life. She really wants to go outside. That's a big point that I forgot to mention. I kind of glossed over or didn't mention at all. But there's also a scene where like Bella, like, takes a little trip outside. They do a little picnic. She really is very curious about the world. She discovers sexual pleasure. Um, and Duncan shows up at just the right time to give her exactly what she wants, the freedom to move outside, and also sexual pleasure, because Duncan, he's a perverted man. He takes advantage of women. So of course, if there's a woman who is naive and he just lets her fondle him, he's gonna take advantage of that, right? Max is obviously appalled by Bella's decision to leave. She doesn't try to hide it. She says that she's gonna go off with Duncan. um, and this is a very interesting point of the film. I wanted to kind of touch on this point where Bella decides to leave Max as like literally after they get engaged. Um, because like we humans, we know marriage to be sacred between two people. And here we have Bella, who's running off to have basically a sexcapade with the man that she just met. And this is like literally every man's worst fucking nightmare, right? And they even play on this fear too by like showing a sex scene immediately after Max says, "Oh, I hope she's doing fine." And it's like they really do kind of hit you with that, and it's like they know what they're doing. It's a narrative choice. And this is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about, but I'll explain why this is good, right? Because I know if you've seen the first video that I made, I talk about like sex scenes like this. Um, but let me dive deep into it, okay? So this movie demands emotional maturity in a sense that not only do you have to understand that sex is a thing that adults do, but you also have to understand that Bella's initial relationship with sex was simply just chasing physical pleasure. To her, it's not sacred. To her, it's not intimate. It is simply just an activity that humans take part in. And she even says this too. She's like, why don't humans just do this all the time? And that is probably something that a lot of people ask themselves, like, why don't we just fuck, you know? Um, but it's throughout, I won't spoil, but we'll get into it, but let's just keep that in mind, right? Like the question of why don't we just have sex all the time? So yeah, so the movie kind of plays on that fear of like, what if your wife just left and did this thing? But it demands emotional maturity from you as the viewer, because you have to understand that Bella's relationship with marriage and sex in general is not the same as like what we believe. So to her, this is simply just her exploring life for what it is, and you have to approach that situation with a certain caution. And for a lot of women, this is natural. Like this conclusion is natural. But if you're not a woman, or if you're not like a masculine presenting person or anything of the sort, you need to understand how a lot this would probably like fall on deaf ears for a lot of guys, because a lot of guys do not live the life that Bella has lived. We are not sheltered. We are kind of forced to be men, and we are not coddled in the same way that women are. So this desire to explore and do things and have sex and stuff like that is not inherent in the way that society kind of forces it upon us, right? So initially, especially if you're someone who is similar to Max and maybe they had an unfaithful partner, this can be very daunting. However, context matters, and I love the way they do this, and I think it's amazing. I think it's good. So that's clearing the air about that, because I know that kind of conflicts with what I said in my first video. I did in my notes, I did write cuck with a question mark to signal how I was feeling while watching the film. But like I said, the movie demands emotional maturity in a sense that Bella is not a fully developed woman and she's never seen the outside world. Her decision to go with Duncan was coerced, yes, but was also made purely out of desire to see the world and pleasure herself. This was Bella's decision. And she didn't do it to hurt Max, nor was she wise to how acting like this can make some people feel, because again, she doesn't understand the intricacies of marriage and partnership. The movie actually like does a really good job of turning this exact scenario on its head, because Duncan, the same man who initially thought of Bella as like a little soft fling for a couple of months, ends up falling in love with her, and she she ends up going out to have sex with other men for various different reasons, and she leaves Duncan distraught and acting as if he owns her, which I think is really clever, right? Because you have two sides of sort of the same coin, where Max falls in love with Bella but let her go do her own thing, understanding the context of the situation. But then you have Duncan, who's none the wiser, falls in love with Bella, even though she never really kind of had feelings for him outside of surface level pleasure. And he's none the wiser to Bella's past. He doesn't know. He thinks that she's just a regular girl, and she ends up calling her a whore, berating her for having sex with other men. There's even a really clever scene, right, where because Duncan, this guy's that pathetic. Like he actually is really good at sex, and he gives Bella a good time. But when Bella goes to the brothel to make money, um, she has a bad experience with a guy who comes after 3 pumps. Like he's just a little pump in the 3 minute pump, not even 3 minute, like a 10-second pump, man. And she even comes back to Duncan. She's like, "Wow, you're actually really good at this. I have a newfound love for you. You're kind of like a man among boys." But he's not having any of it. In his mind, she is property, and she betrayed him by having sex with other men. Other even though they weren't even like boyfriend and girlfriend, like it was just his own sick in the head view of the relationship. Um, but yeah, basically, uh, this was really important for Bella because she understands that there's levels to this shit when it comes to sex. Um, and there's some really funny like sex commentary here, and it's done so well. I mean, I love the whole downward spiral of Duncan. I didn't know who it was at the time, but Mark Ruffalo plays Duncan, and he's really funny. He does a really good job. It's so good. In the sake of time, I won't get into the very specifics of every little detail regarding this aspect of Bella's character development with sex and stuff like that. But I'll leave you guys with this. So to me, Bella kind of started off as like this sheltered woman. She goes off into the world. This black and white, boring life is visually turned to color. Like the black and white turns to color as soon as she leaves. Which parallels with an experience that many young women have where they may be sheltered from a life that is dangerous and filled with curiosity. Um, and you know, while there aren't many young women walking around with the literal brain of a child, at least to my knowledge, there are a lot of women who feel like they didn't get a chance to live their lives doing these things. And as a man, I actually found my mind more open to the way that women explore themselves. And while I was never really a person to judge or berate women for doing their own things and being themselves, I did find myself often confused with this desire, because as I say again, like I was not comfort. I mean, I wasn't sheltered, nor am I very lustful, even in my ripe age of the early 20s. So this desire just never really like landed with me, but I do have enough empathy to kind of see where, you know, a lot of women come from. But this movie did truly open my eyes to how fucking boring it would be to live as someone like Bella, to live as a woman from this time period, and even in the modern age where simply just wanting to see what the world is like and explore yourself comes with so much societal consequence and beration. I might sound like a baby's first profound film here, but you got to understand that I don't actively seek out films that touch on these topics. So stuff like this is uncharted territory for me. It's something that I approach with a lot of open mindedness. And it's really done well. I'm very grateful to have this film kind of like be a reintroduction, because I have watched film and read books that touch on this stuff, but it's been a while for me. I've just been kind of doing my own thing. Um, but I really do appreciate this film for enlightening me on a level beyond simple empathy for women. So, if you're a woman out there and you've seen this film and you like it, I'd love to discuss your feelings on this particular part of the film where she explores sex and stuff like that, because I just like to see your perspective. I really just like discussing films, so feel free to leave a comment and drop your thoughts in there. Um, But anyways, so the whole sexcapade with Duncan, I use that word lightly. It's just a joke. It was more than just that. But the whole situation with Duncan ends up being a bust, and they end up poor. And I'll talk about that in a second. But I'll just set the stage. So essentially, Bella leaves to go work at a brothel to make money. And the reason why they were poor is because aside from just learning about, physical pleasure and stuff like that, um, Bella meets a couple of people while she's out with Duncan who talks about philosophy. She meets this cynical guy who talks about how life is like terrible and humans are just beasts with unnatural desires and they're all just like bad and stuff like that. He's just a very cynical man. And Bella is initially confused by this outlook because you have to understand that Bella is a very sheltered individual. She comes from a very privileged place. She lived in a big house. She wasn't particularly poor. And on top of that, when she does leave out into the world where she risks exposure to bad things in life, it's through the lens of a very rich man. So she lived a very, like, pleasure filled life. And because of that, she has an outlook on the world that is naively optimistic. And the cynical man that she meets does this thing where he takes her down to the slums, and the slums isn't depicted like how you would see in real life. The slums is kind of like depicted as like this metaphorical hell where there's just like dead starving people everywhere, and it's pretty fucking horrifying, but it's also visually stunning in its own twisted beautiful way. And Bella is just distraught from this, like it shatters her entire worldview. And the cynical man did this intentionally to hurt her, but this is where I really love Bella's character here because she does something very profound. She sees this, and initially she wants to help out the poor people. So she takes all of Duncan's money that he made from gambling, and she tries to give it to the poor people because she sees the needy and she wants to help. That is like her instinct. That is what she wants to do. And this is a very naive, well, I wouldn't say naive, but it's not a developed mindset yet, but it does plant the seeds for how Bella eventually feels about capitalism and socialism and just the social class when it comes to wealth, the class disparity. Um, and I really do like this development for Bella. It's actually like it's really well done because it gets developed on in the future. So upon this this devastating discovery, Bella comes to the conclusion that although the world may be sick and twisted, we should actively seek to improve it. And I actually love this outlook because I completely agree 100%. It also takes a nice little jab at cynical people because when Bella reaches this conclusion, she makes fun of the guy. She calls him like, "Oh, you're just a coward who's given up on the world. Uh, you accepted the pain because you can't take it." And I kind of like that message. I 100% agree with that message. I think if you're someone who looks at the stuff, the bad things that happen, obviously we should embrace it. We shouldn't shelter or turn cheek to the devastating things that happen in this world, but we also shouldn't just stop there, right? We shouldn't stop at simply just acknowledging it. Now that we know the problem, we should actively seek to improve the quality of life for everybody around the world. And I love this message in the film. I'm so glad they went with that because there's so many ways to fuck up such a sensitive topic, and they did it so well. Eventually, though, the movie does come to a nice but rather swift conclusion when, after Bella goes through all these learning experiences, she finds out that Godwin is sick, and she's also like very tired of all the adventuring. So she finally comes home to settle down with Max after Godwin tells Max to go track her down. Um, and it's really nice. So Bella kind of just, she's a changed woman. She finally settles down with Max, and Max also addresses the whole, whoring around stuff. He does it in a healthy and comedic way. He acts like, okay, but that's fine. You're your own person, but have you been tested? It's really funny. Like they don't stop at any point to, kind of brush away the humor. The humor stays throughout the whole film. So it's really nice to see that. Um, and then they get married and they have a wedding. And at the wedding, it seems like things are finally looking happy and resolved. However, Bella's past comes to haunt her as Duncan comes back after going crazy. He brings Alfie to the wedding. Alfie is a man who used to be married to Bella in her past life. Um, this part was like really kind of gut wrenching, right? Because you go through this emotional journey with Bella, and it finally looks like things are gonna just come to like a nice, clean, soft landing. But then, like, this guy comes in, and you don't really think about it, right? Because we're introduced to Bella's old self in the beginning of the film as she jumps off the bridge, but it's never really questioned like about the pregnancy or like the father or the husband if there was any. And here comes this guy, he's like, "Oh, wait, you forgot this one little detail." So the movie does a really good job of like just throwing that in there to kind of just like kick off the third act of the ex-husband coming to the wedding. Um you're just hit with just so many moving pieces. You never even thought to consider that maybe if the husband catches wind of her back to life, that he would come back. Um, so as essentially, Bella leaves Max to go with Alfie. And again, emotional maturity is demanded here because it's easy to sit here as a man and say, "Oh my God, she's leaving again. What a whore! Has she learned nothing from Duncan?" But you have to take a second to think for a second. Bella here isn't impressed or she wasn't seduced by Alfie. She just wants to learn about her past self. And as the viewer, you should too, right? Because Victoria, or Bella's old self, is sort of a mystery. We don't really explore too much about her past. So you as a viewer and Bella obviously is conflicted, but also wants answers, right? Um, so she visit Alfie's house and everything comes full circle because she basically comes to the conclusion that this guy sucks, this house sucks, this guy, like, this rich guy who points a gun at everything, like, she's just not happy where she is. um it's funny because I say it comes full circle because she basically feels like she wants to die again. She even says like, "I'd rather you just fucking shoot me in the heart if I'm gonna be trapped here again." And I really love this because it goes beyond just her being not satisfied with Alfie, but also just like the feeling of being trapped yet again, right? Like all her life through the arcs, she was just held down, whether it was by Godwin, Max, Duncan, and now Alfie. Like in her entire life, she's never just been given a choice to do what she wants to do. And this guy's threatening her life, and she says, "Well, if this is all life has to offer, just fucking end it again." It's really a nice scene, but eventually she fights back. She like throws alcohol in the dude's face, causing him to shoot himself in the foot. Alfie is injured, and Bella runs away back to Godwin Hospital with Alfie's injured body, saying that they have to save him because while she may not like the dude, she's not a murderer. And she also wants to become a doctor, so this is an opportunity for her to save a life as she, always kind of wanted. It was kind of like her aspiration. Um, in order to save Alfie's life, they replace his brain with that of the goat, and it's kind of goofy. It's a little silly. The ending is kind of it's a little weird, but it's satisfying nonetheless. Max and Bella, it isn't explicitly stated whether or not they get married, but they live happily ever after with a friend that Bella met. I kind of glossed over that, but I'll talk about it in a second because it's kind of a point that I want to talk about. But they all live happily ever after. Bella develops as a person. Godwin eventually dies, but it's a bittersweet ending because he dies in the hands of his family. It's very sad, but also kind of happy at the same time. Overall, not a bad ending. Just a little goofy at the end, but satisfying nonetheless. So overall, I want to say this was an amazing film that mixes a lot of elements together for a truly interesting 2 hours of funny commentary, emotional scenes, thought provoking moments, and beautiful, beautiful scenery. I can't really pick out things that I don't like about the film. However, I will say that the arc of Bella going to the brothel to make money, while it is the most logical progression of the plot, it doesn't land with me, and it's not because of the sex. I'm not taking these prude accusations. actually feel like the sex stuff is necessary, and it actually enhances the arc. Some of the scenes were hilarious, like the dude crawling around with his dick hanging out. That shit had me rolling, bro. My problem with that arc is the underdeveloped relationship between Bella and a woman named Toinette. This was one of the other girls working at the brothel that Bella met. And this was important because it enhances her education of socialism in the film. After she learns about the poor people, Toinette is also a socialist. So she kind of teaches Bella about the structured way of approaching the class disparity in the world. And I think that part is really important. But there's obviously some implied, romantic relationship going on here. But we never really explore why they became close aside from the whole, socialism stuff. And Toinette kind of just feels like a fling that Bella had to further explore herself. Um, Ultimately falling into the trap that a lot of woman loving woman relationships fall into in film, where it's kind of just being played off as like just a phase that women go through. And it's not something that's like a deal breaker for me. It doesn't hurt the film in any way, but it is just a pattern that I noticed with films. It's hardly a critique, but I definitely was less engaged at this point compared to other parts of the film. We hit that 30-minute mark, so man, I gotta work on doing this a little bit shorter. But overall, I give this film a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Amazing film. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, that's Poor Things. See you guys in the next one.